everyone, and welcome to the India Climate Dialogues hosted by the City Climate Alliance at the National Institute of Urban Affairs. The topic for today is integrating gender into the city climate agenda. To explain today's topic, let me really put forth some very interesting statistics for you. The Global Gender Gap Index for 2022, released by the World Economic Forum, shows that India has slipped to the 135th position globally out of 146 countries. The periodic labor force survey of 2021 shows that labor force participation rate among Indian women is just 23.15% in contrast to 57.75% in men. All this puts forth the need to account for investing into women's empowerment. And the starting point for this needs to recognize the contribution of women and girls towards building resilience in cities. To discuss this very compelling topic, we have with us four very passionate women urbanists who are walking the talk on this account. We have with us Shalini Mishra, Social Safeguards and Gender Officer at the National Institute of Urban Affairs; Sonal Shah, Executive Director of the Center for Sustainable and Equitable Cities; Prachi Merchant, who is a member, Advisory Committee on Gender at the Municipal Corporation of Greater Mumbai; and Krishna Desai, who is a technical expert on gender in the transport intersection at GIZ India. Welcome, everyone. So the way we would divide this discussion is in two parts. One is the what's, and the second is the how's. So let's begin with the what's. And here I would like to bring my colleague Shalini in. So Shalini, my question to you is, how can cities integrate gender perspectives in climate decision-making to reduce the adverse effects that this has on women? Over to you, Shalini.
Thanks, Saili, and a warm welcome to all the experts, and thanks a lot for sparing your time on behalf of NIUA. The answer is very simple, Saili. The only way to integrate a gender perspective in your climate decisions is through adopting gender mainstreaming. There is no other way, there is no better way of doing it than adopting gender mainstreaming, not just in your climate change related projects, but in every single initiative that cities take. In the context of the climate dialogue, gender mainstreaming would mean a thorough and complete understanding of the gendered implications of climate change and a complete and total integration of women's needs and priorities in all your policies, programs, not just in those which are specifically related to climate change. So very quickly, what are these broad gender issues and implications that we are talking about? It's understood that women are disproportionately more vulnerable to climate change-induced weather conditions. In terms of women's unpaid care work, it's commonly understood that it makes the climate change-related extreme weather conditions add to women's unpaid care work, makes it more difficult for women to adapt to climate change. Then we have the implications on women's and girls' health. We have studies which show a correlation between gender-based violence and climate change-induced changes. One of the most comforting, however, the nuances in this debate, which I often like to refer to, is the recognition of the fact that women are also agents of change. So they need not always be looked at as passive victims of climate change, needing help, but also as repositories of knowledge on how to conserve resources and how to live in harmony with nature. Related to this whole question again is the question of marginalization of women in decision making. Now, so generally it is by adopting gender mainstreaming, but more specifically, one of the first steps that I feel cities must take is to start a process of listening to communities, especially communities which live on the edge where the impact is most acutely felt. So in the urban context, this would be the urban poor, and there would be many intersectionalities of caste, class, gender, etc. that we know about. And within these communities of the urban poor, start listening specifically to women and girls to understand how they're coping with climate change. Very often, this is not even very accurately reflected in the data. So very quickly, I'll explain this with an example. So maybe if a city has been flooded, a survey is conducted to assess the damages, maybe fix the compensation. Some typical questions that we often see in these surveys are number of working days lost, and so amount of income lost, extent of damage to property, incidence of waterborne diseases. Now, this to me is an example of a completely blind, gender blind survey, because I do not understand how, on the basis of these questions, we can even begin to understand, for instance, the colossal increase in the unpaid care work of women because of the flood, because of the waterborne diseases, because of the burden of reconstruction of damaged property. How do we understand the vulnerability of women and girls to violence and harassment if, for instance, they've been rendered homeless, or even if they're in a relief center? The loss of informal, small scale income generating activities that women take, how are we going to compensate for that? And most importantly, the long term disruptions in the lives of young girls. Some will drop out from school, some will never get back, some may be hurriedly married off, and I've seen this in some cases, and because of the parental concern over the security and safety. And so the flood will, for this kind of in this kind of a situation, be the end of a dream to be financially independent. So these are very long lasting changes which have to be accurately reflected and understood. So cities have to wear the gender lens and look beyond what is obvious when it comes to climate change. Ask the right questions and include these in your databases. Because to reduce the adverse effects on women, one has to first be able to understand what these effects are. Another level, urban local bodies will have to also gear up for the fact that all kinds of inequalities are going to increase. So do whatever is required to bridge the gender gap. Don't just look at climate change in a silo. Through education, employment, healthcare, and take steps to empower women, because the more empowered they are, the faster they will recover from the climate change induced shocks. So that's all for now, Saili.
Thank you, Shalini. I think you really laid down the whole topic so well. I think it set the tone for today's discussion. Here is where I would like to bring Sonal Shah in, actually, because I think what you said is so important, that do we really listen to women? And do we look at, when we talk of gender mainstreaming, are we looking at it from a very, very small, micro lens, and saying, oh, it's women, so it might be about protection only. So Sonal, your organization actually works in a very interesting intersection of climate, women and urbanism, right? Particularly mobility. So when it comes to women's issues, the approach is to protect. So how do we change this narrative into a rights-based one and not a protection-based one? Over to you, Sonal.
Sure. Thank you so much, Seli, for inviting me, and very happy to be here with other women practitioners as well. So I'll answer this through a number of data points. Yeah. In urban India and also in urban Asia broadly, we find that able-bodied men in the age group of 15 to 59 years constitute only 1/3 of our population or thereabouts, right? Now, what this means is that when our infrastructure and services are designed for this group, you're removing a large section of the population who could be potential regular users of your services, right? So that is one. For us, I think I would also like to share that for us, when we talk about women, I would like to expand that definition a little bit. It's women, it's girls, it's gender and sexual minorities. It's also women with disabilities. So I'm just hoping that we have this in mind as we talk about gender in mobility. Now, I'm also going to come with some data points from the work that we have done. This was across 3 cities in Bihar, Patna, Gaya, Muzaffarpur. And we see that these are to some extent observed in other cities in India as well. So one is that on one hand, we find women in urban India broadly have a lower per capita trip rate than men. So they are traveling, making lesser trips than men. However, women are a majority of pedestrians in our cities. Now, this is big because this is not only about women in transport, it is about how do we reimagine transport when we look at it through a gender lens. And to me, data, therefore, is very important. While we have good quality, qualitative data, it needs to be supported with good gendered mobility data that recognizes and brings to light how gender inequality is reflected in travel inequity. Let me explain again. Our research also showed that women were 60% of paratransit users, right? And again, I don't think this is well recognized or known because often we only look at work trips, right? And we don't look at education, household care, and household and care work-related trips. Women may constitute anywhere between 25 to 40% of bus commuters, right? We also know that women, and we are seeing this interestingly, that girls may travel equally or more than boys for education. This reduces significantly when it comes for work. Now, we can say on one hand, this is a difference in genders. But if we investigate why this happens, we may also find it could be due to lack of safety, and therefore women are constrained, or the lack of because they are bearing the burden of household and care work. So we can have a rights-based approach if we link mobility data with gender unequal roles and understand why is it that these happen. That is, I think to me, that is a big one. The second I will say is we can have a rights-based approach if we move, in my opinion, from gender mainstreaming to a gender transformative approach. I think we are at a point in the 1990s where there was a lot of emphasis on gender mainstreaming. I think there was some disappointing results from there, but we really need to move towards how is it that our infrastructure, services, and systems lead to transforming gender roles. It is long, it is difficult, but I think that is the goal. I will kind of stop here, and happy to kind of also in the how have some examples to share as well.
Thank you, Sonal. I think very, very interesting statistics that you brought in, and worth thinking about. And I think, you kind of compelled us to also redefine the way. And that actually brings me to the next question where, the whole systems-based thing of transforming. So instead of mainstreaming, how can we look at transforming? And that's my next question to Prachi Merchant, actually. There is so much, so much statistics available. There is so much that we know. There is so much that we want to do. But how do we really create this consensus for this transformation when it comes to actual implementation? Because that is a different ballgame altogether. So, Prachi, how can cities actually help in fixing this? And you're working in one of the biggest and richest municipal corporations in India, and you have taken some steps towards this. So please put your few points on this.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Aili, for inviting me. And it's my pleasure to be in this forum today. So yes, my response would be related to the Mumbai example, and especially the effort that we took to prepare and mandate certain things related to gender in the development plan. That's the master plan that we call in Delhi. Now, the premise that we started with was the workforce participation percentage that even you mentioned about, that it's 16% and 25%, and it's compared to men, it's 57. But if you look at Mumbai, it's much lower. It's 16%, and that too you're talking of the formal sector. So the question to us, which was, I would say, forced upon the gender group, who very strongly came up saying that you need to do something in the development plan, had this as their base, which is that if there's a 16% workforce participation of women in a city like Mumbai, which is considered to be safe and progressive, then what can we do to improve it? Because the entire country looks at what Mumbai does, and it really follows what is to be done. So when we broke down these questions, what the group came up with were with certain demands and certain issues. But we as the planners sitting to do the master plan wanted to know how can we convert this demand into actually implementable land use, or say reservation. So when we broke it down, we kind of understood what are the issues that are connected, or what are the facilities that would help her move out from her place to get a job, and and actually improve the participation. So there were 4 or 5 things that we identified. First one was that if a woman comes to the city, she needs a place to live in. And then we broke it down saying that it's a single mother, it's a person who wants to live for short term, who's come for an interview, a lady who wants longer stay. She has a choice of living in a single room and double room and dormitories and all, not a typical hostel as such, but it is called as a multipurpose working women housing. And then that was for her staying needs. Also, women who are in distress, can something done for her by giving her shelter for a day or 2, counseling, and then send her off in a much better mindset. The second was the children that she takes care of. Can that be clubbed? Can that be taken care of? The third one was, this is a joint, at many places it is a joint responsibility, but at many, many more places it's not. So how does she take care of the old people? It's somehow her responsibility. So can we look into old age people, maybe daycare for the old people, old women also? And then you have the informal sector, which is the vending zones, or even the women who need skills. Women who have taken a break during pregnancy or some reason or the other, and she wants to come back with added skills. So can the BMC support, such kind of women? So we looked at 2 ranges of people. That was people coming from as migrants, in-house, that is people living within the city or the state, and the informal part of it. Now, what we did was we carried out 3-4 processes here. The first was the consultative process, which was really strong, as I mentioned, which, we did not just take the issues or understandings from the people, from the group. We said them, let's work together. Let's look at what can be derived as actual reservations. And what culminated was actual reservations. So today we have a statutory document of development plan, which has reservations minimum of 24 for, say, working women in every ward, old age women, old age homes in 24 wards. A childcare center is a neighborhood scale reservation. So it has electoral ward, that's 260 kind of childcare centers. Then you have Aadhaar Kendra. We are also contemplating to change the name because women don't want Aadhaar, they want Sahakarya. So now we are trying to rename it as Sahakarya Kendra. And then you have vending zones. We kept some reservations in every market so that women do get opportunity. Second was the approval process, which was pretty much simple and the least challenging because no one really objected for gender-related reservations. It was quite welcome. The third was the implementation, which was really, really the challenging one. In fact, we had to make a policy because once we have the reservations, what do we do? How do we implement? Who comes in? What are the eligibility criteria? What should be? This is the first time we are doing. What are the standards? So, budgets, designs, construction. But we are lucky that we have some implementation of all the 5 reservations that I mentioned, which are on the BMC plot, have started, and by next year they should be ready. And the 4th part, which will come maybe by the end of the year, is the dissemination process. How do we take this process to different cities of the state? We are in fact working on the standards, that how much is really required. So it's been a very, very long journey, Saili. I think we started in 2015, and I still see there's a lot of ups and downs and challenges. But yeah, I think the crux is that it was made mandatory in the development plan. So there is no, talk in the air. There is something that you have to do it. Thanks.
Thank you, Prachi. I think that is a very, very important example that needed to be kind of put out there, because many a times we do not, we talk of mainstreaming gender, or like Sonal says, transforming roles really in so many ways. But unless and until it is legal, unless and until there is a statutory document that requires it, many things don't move. So this could be a way in which cities could, use a similar process and learn from your example when they are preparing their master plans and development plans. So that could be the way ahead for cities. Let me now bring in Krishna. So Krishna, you basically come from GIZ, and your agency and your projects actually aim at highlighting the importance of gender equality and women empowerment as an integral part of sustainable development. So how do you really get cities and states to effectively mobilize gender responsive development through policies and action plans?
So thanks, Aili, for this opportunity and for inviting me to this discussion. So when we look at the sustainable development goals, one of it aims towards achieving gender equality and empowering all girls and women. So this means that, you need to develop cities which can provide for equal opportunities for all, having safe and affordable public transport systems. Safe first and last mile connectivity becomes a necessary means for accessing all kind of opportunities, be it economical, educational, or medical. But we do see that issues in the transport systems, issues of harassments in public spaces, inconvenient transport systems, the societal norms, make limits or restricts the mobility of women, and also makes women feel vulnerable while traveling. The few issues which we see are, issues of overcrowding in buses at peak hours, deserted, ill-lit streets, bus stops, poor crew conduct, low women presence on street, absence of crime preventing elements on street, bus stops, terminals, and one of the most important thing is, the absence of gender perspective in the infrastructure systems, which make women and marginal groups feel vulnerable while traveling in public transport systems. So this has an impact on the opportunities that women can access, which is reflected in the workforce participation ratio also, about which you have already mentioned. We see that most of the women are employed in informal jobs. The major reason for this is that informal jobs can be accessed near their home itself. So for us to have gender equality and gender empowerment, it is necessary that women can have equal access to any mode of transport, and a safe access to any mode of transport, be it a bus, metro, auto, and first and last mile opportunities. So when we look at gender safety in transport system, it is not just the public transport agencies, but also agencies like the municipal corporations, the motor vehicles department, the police enforcement, etc. So it is necessary to have a coordinated approach towards having gender safety in the transport system. So having a gender nodal agency which can coordinate and monitor the gender related activities with all these agencies, we think is necessary. For example, the development plan, which forms the guiding document for a city, needs to have a gender perspective. We collect a lot of data while preparing a development plan and even the comprehensive mobility plan. So having, segregating the data which is collected based on gender, and then analyzing those data points, and then forming the development plan, or designing the infrastructure systems, can have a greater impact. Currently, the women workforce in transport and storage sector is less than 4%, which further reduces as we go towards the leadership roles. We have surveyed around 30 transit agencies, and I have found that only 4 of these have women as leaders. Having training programs, mentorship programs, outreach programs can be introduced to encourage more women to get into transport sector. Women-friendly policies like flexible shifts, childcare centers, maternity leaves, and having adequate involvement in facilities needs to be included in the sector as well. So I think such kind of initiatives which can motivate and encourage women to get into the sector is very necessary. Yeah. Thank you, Saili.
Thank you, Krishna, for bringing in some very interesting examples. And I think we will talk more about these examples in the second round of questions that we go. So that brings me back to Shalini, actually. And Shalini, you're a part of a very interesting flagship program that NIUA is leading, the cities program. And many of programs like the cities program are actually today putting a requirement on participating cities to have a gender lens in their projects. So in case cities want to really participate in such projects, what should be the starting point? I think the what's, because that's the first question that cities ask. How do we start? What do we do? What are the process we should follow? So Shalini, a bit on that, if you can put some light into that.
Thanks, Saili. Yes, it's very interesting to be part of the cities program. Cities is for cities investments to innovate, integrate, and sustain. Although right now we are in the designing phase, and it's a bit too premature to talk in details about. But the fact remains that there is an overarching commitment to promoting gender equality and women's empowerment. And gender mainstreaming is going to be cross-cutting across all components of the project. We have prepared a gender action plan for the entire program, and almost every document, gender will be integrated. In the selection process itself, when the SPVs apply for the selection process, they'll be assessed for gender inclusivity. They'll be doing a gender analysis. We've prepared some guiding questions, which they'll be answering to brainstorm what it is that they can do, what are the non-stereotypical things they can promote in their projects. Based on the gender elements of the project design, more weightage will be given to those cities which undertake to do substantial work. And later in the maturation phase, with the help of the PMU, which will be based here in NIUA, we will be preparing gender action plans for the projects. Now, so basically we are following a twofold strategy here. Some cross-cutting issues on which we will want all projects to look at, regardless of which thematic area they are in. So this will be, for instance, adequate and meaningful consultations with women and inclusion of their needs in the project design itself. Then steps to ensure that a sizable amount of the employment that is generated in the project goes to women. And another major component here will be building the strength of the staff on gender itself. So there'll be lots of workshops, etc., which will be planned to basically equip the staff with basic knowledge of gender issues. The second thing also that we are contemplating, and this is again something underway now, is that in each of the thematic areas, based on a survey of existing reports, projects, what has worked in different parts of the globe, we will come up with a list of entry points for the SPVs. Some of them may not be relevant to the way the project is designed, but nonetheless, we'll come up with some gender and mainstreaming entry points, and we'll be sharing these across workshops, just so they know what the possibilities are in each of the thematic areas. So thanks, Saili. I hope I have answered your question.
Yes, Shalini. I think, yes, we have some idea about how, what are some of the steps that can be taken when cities really have this kind of a requirement coming on their plate. and how they could, approach this. Actually, I would like to bring Sonal in here immediately, because Sonal, you're working on several national, international projects. You're working with cities. You're even working, I think, in Bangladesh now on certain, programs which require action. And that, really talk of bringing in inclusive green, blue, gray strategies in climate, and which are, inclusive in nature, which need to have a gender element. How do you kind of approach such projects, or what could be the way that cities should approach this project? And you could give us examples from the transportation or mobility perspective.
Thanks so much, Sally. And I think I've been very fortunate to work on projects that really looked at increasing our ambition on gender actions, and these have been gender focused projects. So I'll highlight that. So we know that Bangladesh is a country with the world's largest delta, and what is its strength is also, in a sense, if you will, affecting it from a climate perspective. So it's very vulnerable to natural disasters, particularly cyclones, and related to that we have floods, salinity, intrusion, etc. We are currently working on a regional knowledge sharing technical assistance program, which will look at coastal towns in Bangladesh. So these are not your large cities. These are cities with a population of anywhere between 9,000 to 50,000, right? So it's good to be, to be out of the Delhis and the Mumbais and the Bangalores of the world, and understand vulnerability of these smaller towns are. So what we have basically a twofold process. We are creating a guideline that focuses on the process of redesigning public open spaces, from incorporating nature-based solutions, gender, and universal access. So here we have very clear criteria on how public open spaces, and these could be anything, right? Because public open spaces for us are our streets. There are parks, but then there are also intersections, if you will, right? So how do these incorporate these three elements? And we are then, in fact, going to develop concept plans with the local governments in the two cities. We have two cities as pilots. They're called the cities of Bagarhat and Kuakata. So we hope that this guideline will also help coastal cities, particularly in low and middle income countries, on what can be done from nature-based solutions perspective, a gender perspective, and a universal access perspective. It's a very bold project. In fact, I am going to be in Bangladesh for the next 2 weeks, where we are doing participatory assessments with multiple groups representing persons with disabilities, as well as women and girls, and using these to sensitize government officials on how these public open spaces can be redesigned. So this should be available to us early next year. So there's still time, I think, within the first quarter. A second project, again, which is in progress is, and I may be limited therefore to talk about it, but something that can be looked forward to, is we are part of a technical assistance program on transit-oriented development and multimodal integration in Bangalore. And being the gender expert, our role really is to look at how do we prioritize multimodal integration from a gender perspective. So what are the key elements? Two, from a TOD perspective, right? So this is also about amenities, but then this is also about whether these amenities are accessible by sustainable modes of transport. I can't say too much at this point, but we are certainly using the gender transformative lens in this as well. So again, hopefully you will have some exciting results, but this might take a little while, early to mid next year. Thanks.
Sonal, and we'll definitely look forward to all the exciting work that your organization is doing, because it's only when so many forces come together and there's good work happening that it will really build on to what we are, the transformation that we are wanting. So all the best to you on that. And that brings me to the last question the second last question for today's discussion, and that is back to Prachi. So let me bring you back onto what you are doing and looking at the Mumbai development plan. So I wanted to understand that what kind of a role does the gender committee play in really helping in the implementation of these various reservations that you have done? So how are you walking the talk on that?
Thanks, Saili. The question of implementation, when it arose, we all started wondering, how do we ensure all this that we have thought about, or how do we retain the spirit of the principles that we have laid, and how do we carry it forward? So we were lucky that this advisory committee on gender was formed. 6 experts from the field are the members today. We are headed by a chairman who is also quite sensitive and has done great work in this field. And we as a committee, our mandate, yes, it was to see to that these reservations are implemented. And so it is a very simple word, right? Implementation, but how do you really go about it? So the question first that arose was that we do not really have any policy. How do we kind of take this forward? So we first worked for a very long time to understand how we can bring up this policy for all these 6 to 7 reservations. And hence we started working on it. We had a team of students who did the basic report and recce on the field and what's existing today and how we can improvise is talked to a lot of people. We got together a lot of stakeholders who are working in areas related to these reservations. And then we kind of started forming the policy. While this was happening, we also had certain sites which were ready for implementation. So how do we do that? So then we took upon ourselves to formulate the brief of the building. We got down to the level of saying that, okay, let's put down the requirements. The architect in our group, she actually designed the first of all the 6 reservations to ensure that whatever we are doing does translate into physical spaces. As Shalini put in the earlier question, that it is the unpaid part which is the most vulnerable and which is most kind of affected to women first, then children, and informal sector especially. So among all these 5-6 reservations, I would say the Sahakarya Kendra is something that we are still struggling to put together a policy for. That is because today there is a very basic Aadhaar Kendra which is running and which is actually catering to the skills which are so obsolete that they do not match the demands of what is required in the city today, and a dynamic city like Mumbai. So we are currently working on that, and that is something that we could relate to the climate action, because if you take care of the job security, especially of the vulnerable, of the informal sector, then you can kind of see to that some assurances has been given through all the effort that we have taken. So in the Sahakarya Kendra, we are actually identifying first the skills. What are the kind of spaces do we need to give them capacity building, training, identify the skills, production centers, selling, manufacturing and selling areas, and incubation centers. There's something 4-5 areas we have actually mapped throughout the city, and depending upon the scale and the location and accessibility to the self-help groups, how can you cater to them? So this is something which we are currently working, and which I would say is directly connected to the climate change. And we are yet to form, a lot of our ideas into actual policy. But the efforts are on, and it will take some time to kind of come up with a robust policy, but we want to do this one very well. So I'm going to come back to all of you for support on this. But for now, yeah, it is this where we are concentrating on.
Thank you, Prachi. And yes, I think we should wish you the best. And I'm sure something like this will, even if it takes time, I think it is about putting certain prototypes and good systems in place which can be replicated, picked up, and built on. So I think even if it takes time, I think having that more robust system in place is more important. So I think all the very best to you and your colleagues who are working on this. And so that brings me to Krishna now. So Krishna, since we are talking about, implementation, largely about what is on ground, I would like you to help us visit, the project that you did in Kerala, where you have initiated gender-sensitive reforms in public transport. So could you give us some specific examples on your approach, and what are the learnings from this example for other cities?
So this project that you are talking about, the gender-sensitive reforms in Kerala. So we started for this project. We started out with focus group discussions and perception surveys with women of different age group, of which Sonal was also a part of this project when we were doing this. So we did this perception survey and focus group discussions to understand the issues women are facing while traveling in public transport. So the issues we came across were, not just in traveling in the vehicle. It was related to the first and last mile connectivity, the waiting at the bus stop, and within the traveling within the bus, and especially the issues were largely related while they were traveling at night. So we also did an institutional assessment and an infrastructure assessment to identify the key factors which were affecting, which were resulting into these issues. So one of the issue which is arising into this is the underrepresentation of women in the transport sector. And so based on this, we had identified a few reforms. So I'll give you examples of what has been implemented, not just in Kerala, but also in the other cities. So as we have discussed earlier also, that the trip pattern of men and women is quite different. Women tend to have shorter trip lengths. They try to combine different purposes, and they tend to trip chain. So there is a lack. So there is a need to understand this pattern, the pattern in which women travel. There is a need to collect data on women's travel pattern, which is generally not there. So Bhubaneswar was the first city that had done it. So the tickets that were generated by Capital Region Urban Transport in Bhubaneswar, which is the public transit agency over there. So they were classifying the tickets into based on gender as male and female. So the data which is now generated, you can collect the data on the female ridership, on the male ridership, the boarding alighting pattern of female, how many females are alighting at a particular bus stop, at what point of time. You can see all these data across the timeline. Similar initiative was also done in Trivandrum. So whatever new ETMs, electronic ticketing machines were brought in, they were reprogrammed so that the tickets which are generated can be classified as male and female. In Bhubaneswar, we also started the e-auto project, in which women and transgender were trained to drive those e-autos. Basically, the e-autos were introduced as the last mile for the last mile connectivity. So the general manager over there, Ms. Deepthi, she suggested that women and transgender should be the drivers for these e-autos. So we supported them in giving the training for driving these autos. Financial training was given to them. Soft skills training was given to them. Apart from this, Kochi Metropolitan Transit Authority, it was recently formed in Kochi I think 1.5 or 2 years back. So they also brought on board a female member to have a female perspective. So she became the gender nodal person for that agency. So that was also based on our suggestions. These were some of the reforms that were implemented on ground. But apart from this, there were other suggestions also that we had given to, to have more women inclusion in the transport sector. That can be done through training, relaxation of criteria, which we have seen in other cities also, like Delhi. So these were a few of the reforms which we had suggested, and few of which were implemented also, Saili. Yeah.
Thank you, Krishna. Since you took Sonal's name, Sonal, do you want to kind of add anything over here? Because she said that you were involved in the Kerala. What I really wanted to know is, when you do approach, I mean, it's a simple question, I guess, and too simple, but maybe it's interesting to know that when you do approach cities, what is the first uptake from them? Is it positive? Is it not? What are the problems that they come up with when you're talking of mainstreaming? I think we need to kind of probably bring that in and close this.
I think a lot depends on who you're speaking to, but otherwise, I mean, who is the person? Because, for example, in Bhubaneswar, where the government officer, Ms. Dipti, is very, very ambitious, then, there is a lot you can do as well. So, but I think some key entry points I have seen are related to safety and improving safety in public spaces. If we are talking, again, depending on who you're speaking to, the workforce participation can also be an entry point, and linking it to mobility and services, I think, is the next big piece. I feel these can become good entry points. We often say that we should try and get quick wins, right? But all I'm trying to say is just be careful about what those quick wins are. I mean, certainly implement those that can be done, that demonstrate, some impact, generate goodwill. But hopefully those then have a slightly longer term ambition. I don't know if Krishna agrees with me or not. Yeah.
I think that was a good way to end this very interesting discussion, because the aim ultimately, like I said when we started off, is to really be able to drive some points down to cities, to policymakers, to implementers, to all of us, who are also advocating this kind of a message. And I think, coming back to Shalini, I think listening and being able to speak it out is also very, very important. So this brings us to the end of today's discussion. Thank you, everyone, to all of you, to sparing your time and being a part of this interesting discussion. And for all the viewers who have tuned in, please stay tuned in for more such interesting discussions with the City Climate Alliance at the India Climate Dialogues. Thank you.